Hi there, I'm Chris for TTCombat Gaming, and I've painted some large scenery kits and a couple of what I would call quite large models. Things like the Morgraph from Mig and Valejo and the Shard of the Void Dragon from Warhammer 40k. But my largest model I've had for a while, and it's been quite intimidating to think about starting it. But it's time we bite the bullet, load up our trusty Pip-Boy, and get straight into it. These are the paints I've used in this video. I primed Liberty Prime in black, then took tungsten steel and airbrushed the entire model. If you don't have an airbrush, you can achieve the same result using a large brush or use a dark silver spray can. Do your best to get all of the model painted silver, but because of the black primer, areas like under the pauldrons and the backpack, which can be trickier to get to, well, it adds to the shading of them, and they'll not be very obvious to see anyway. Using gunmetal, we can get a nice mid-tone metal. We'll need to keep some of the tungsten steel showing, so focus your painting from the middle to the tops of panels. This model has some lovely big panels to work with, so even someone with as little airbrush skill as me can get a result I'm happy with. After that, we'll use ancient steel to get our highlight colour. Focus the paint to the very top of the panels, and try to ensure a nice smooth blending. Once we have this done, we've got most of the model painted. With the metals done, we can take this opportunity to start the base. The base is a big old chunk of resin with some amazing details on it. For quickness, we'll get the dirt done with the airbrush, before I pack the spray booth away to do some brushwork. I have my base on a Lazy Susan to make rotating it easy, and using trench mud, I spray all of the dirt. If it gets on other bits of the base, that's not really an issue, because we can tidy it up when it comes to painting them later, so focus on getting a good solid colour after a few passes. Using umber wash, we'll add some shading into the areas where the dirt meets other items like rocks, the red rocket sign in the rocket, the Nuka-Cola machine, and a chunk of concrete forecourt. A couple sprays of this will help develop nice shading. Once the wash is dry, we can take apart the spray booth and get ready to do some brushwork. Now that we've got a brush in hand, it's time to paint the Mark 28 nuclear bombs in Liberty Prime's hand and in his backpack. For this, we'll base the bombs with Deathworld Forest. Be as neat as you can when you're painting around the metal areas, in particular between the fingers. I ended up doing 3 coats of this, but your coverage may vary. Once that's dry, we can move on to Athonian Camo Shade and apply the wash over all of the Mark 28 bombs. Again, be careful around the metal areas. If you get some on the metals, immediately clean your brush off and soak up the mistake. Next, I've thinned down striking green to make a glaze, and using this, we can get a highlight. You can also use thicker striking green to edge highlight the hard edges on the stabilizer fins. As with all glazing, it'll take multiple passes to get the colour blend we want, so let each layer dry before glazing it further. The cap of the nukes are red, so using Capo Red as a base colour, we can quickly and easily get it painted. Give it a couple coats to get a good strong colour. Using Berserker Bloodshade, apply a wash to all of the nuke caps. Be careful not to overload it with the wash. If you get too much on, you can soak up the excess with a clean brush. Viscera Red makes perfect highlight colour, so look at where the light would hit and focus the colour there. Remember, on rounded surfaces like these, the light kind of wraps around it, so you can take the highlight a little further around the sides if you like, and do a couple coats to get a nice colour. For the yellow band around the body of the nukes, I use Spotlight Yellow, my favourite yellow paint. To make it easier to paint, I use one of the fingers as where the band would be, which saves having to paint between the fingers. Try to be as neat as possible to get a straight line, but if it's a little off at points, it probably won't be too noticeable, and if it is, use Deathworld Forest to reline it with green. Capri Sunshine Yellow will be what we use to highlight the band. I just use small strokes on the band, but leave an outline of Spotlight Yellow. As we paint down the sides of the nuke, I begin to narrow the Capri area to blend it. Now we're going to use some oils, so we'll need synthetic brushes because oils will seriously destroy natural ones. Use an Abteilung 502 Starship Filth thinned down with VMS Oil Expert Enhancing Medium to make an oil wash. The glossy finish of the metal paints will aid in the capillary action. Basically, it will make the oil wash flow easily. Just tap the oil into recesses along the details and just let the oil follow along. And don't worry too much if it's a bit messy, because with oils, we can easily remove it too. We'll use this across the entire model, so take your time and pick out all of the panel lines. You can also use thinners to clean off areas you have made a mistake on, and I use Modeler's World Thinner and Cleaner. Just put some on a cotton bud and use it to wipe away mistakes. This also helps to create streaking effects, and the Starship Filth makes great grease stain. Now, Liberty Prime is over 200 years old, and this version of him has been in the capital Wasteland, destroyed, carried to Boston, rebuilt, and used to gain entry into the Institute, so he's going to show some wear. Using Dark Rust, we'll dab on dots onto areas of the model, and using the thinner and cleaner on a cotton bud, we can pull the oil down, leaving more of the pigment at the bottom, where the rust would naturally develop more. If you don't like how you've moved the oil, you can easily remove it and reapply a dot of oil and try again until you're happy with it, which is just such a great thing about using oils. And by adding more to an area you are happy with, it lets you build up more tones and depth in the rust. Use this technique across the whole model to add some age and wear to the model. The only areas I don't apply the rust are the power nodes on the top of the backpack area, because I have a plan for them later. Using light rust, we can add fresh rust to the model, and I apply this as small dots, and again, using a thinner on a cotton bud to spread it out slightly. It blends a little with the dark rust, which adds a lot of depth of the rust, and some more realism to it. You know, this massive nuke-throwing robot. But think about where the fresh rust will develop, and add it to those areas. Now, if you think you've covered a bit too much of the bare metal, this step is for you. Using thinner on cotton buds, we can clean up the areas we want. Large panels clean towards the tops, and sharp edges clean to give a highlight. Areas like these benefit from having bare metal shown for visual interest. And as the buds get dirty, it allows you to add some tonal changes to the metals too. Like the metal is showing some tarnishing without being rusted, or even use them for the grease marks. Using the dark mud oil brusher paint from Ammo by Mig, we'll apply a few dots to the pistons around Liberty Prime's limbs. These will make an oily, greasy effect, perfect for what would be on moving parts of this giant model. We'll use the same technique as before. The oil brusher is a self-contained pot with a clog-free nozzle, giving the brush the perfect amount of oil paint, which I think is a great idea, minimising waste. To spread the oil, I use a synthetic brush with some thinner so I can get a little more control than I would with a cotton bud. Now, the weathering step is done, And we are finished with using oils. Keep Liberty Prime upright and to one side, allowing the oils to cure and dry. I gave it 2 days and was able to handle the model fine thanks to the oil expert and oils made specifically for model painting. If I use artist oil paints, I'd have to wait longer because they have a higher linseed oil content. To clean your synthetic brushes, use the thinner and cleaner to remove any residual oil and thoroughly clean with a paper towel. I also clean the brushes afterwards with Master's brush soap, but these brushes can only be used for oils now. While waiting for the oils to cure, we can get the base finished. Using Halfling Pastry Brown, we can use a large dry brush to give a highlight to the dirt we painted earlier in the tutorial. We don't need to be massively neat here because we'll be covering the other areas we haven't painted yet. To paint the rocks, Admiralty Grey will give us a nice base colour to work from. I use this on both the rocks and the concrete forecourt chunk. Make sure to get into all the cracks. On the rocky outcrop behind the rocket there's a bit of a cave entrance looking hole, which I don't paint. Next we'll base coat all the red areas with Capo Red. The 3 RED letters, the rocket, nose cone, the coolant pump, and the Nuka-Cola machine, other than where the bottles would be, are all red. Try to be neat when you're near the dirt and the rocks, and if you get paint where you shouldn't, either use a damp brush to try and clean it, or go back over with whichever colour you accidentally got red on. With Null Oil, we'll apply a wash to the concrete chunk and all of the red, other than the Nuka-Cola machine, as I want to give that a different red tone. The other rocks we'll leave for the moment, because they're going to have a different tone than the concrete, and time will be important for that. Now, I cover the rest of the rocks with Null Oil, but I want to use a wet brush to add some more water to the wash to prolong the working time for it, because I'll be going straight into the next step while the wash is still wet. Using Umber Wash, I mix with the Null Oil on the rocks. This will give the rocks a nice natural tone, and if you stipple on some of the Umber Wash after mixing with the Null Oil, you can get some interesting colour variation. The Nuka-Cola machine gets a wash of Berserker Bloodshade over it, which adds a nice bit of shading to it without it matching the other red pieces. To highlight all of the rocks and concrete, I use Shale Grey. I highlight the edges of the stonework and cracks. On the large flat areas, I add little marks with Shale Grey, just to give the impression of a slightly uneven surface to break up the flat colour. Using Viscera Red, we'll highlight all of the red on the base, using a few layers to build up a smooth colour transition from dark to the light. Inside the RAD sign, I add a small amount to the wider areas, and on the outer parts of the letters, I paint towards the tops. Going back to using Shale Grey, I paint the area on the Nuka-Cola machine where the bottles sit, and the paint is strong enough to be able to cover up any of the red paint that I got on the area. Really, I should have painted the stonework at this step and then got them both done together. Live and learn. I felt like I could take the Viscera Red a little further and make the highlight a little stronger, and I'm glad I did, because the end result of it looks really good. Here's a comparison of the extra Viscera Red and without. I'm sure you'll agree it's more appealing. The writing on the Nuka-Cola machine is a nice bright yellow, so I'll put a base coat of Spotlight Yellow down first. Use the side of the brush to make sure you just hit the top faces of the letters, because using the tip of the brush can lead to accidentally getting paint on the red areas. With Capri Sunshine Yellow, focus on the highest points of the letters to give it a nice bright highlight. To make the Nuka-Cola machine stand out from the rest of the red on the base, I use a glaze of Boo Yeah Orange to make the machine really pop. Make sure you also use it on the high points of the damaged areas too. To highlight the grey we used on the Nuka-Cola machine earlier, I thinned down white and glazed it over the shale grey, so it isn't too stark of a colour. With gunmetal, paint in the display and symbol on the coolant pump. There's also the coin slot and lever plus some damage on the Nuka-Cola machine, on the rocket and the red sign as well. It's also good to add some chips and scratches across everything just to give it some damage and weathering. Using black paint, paint in the screen on the top of the Nuka-Cola machine as well as the glass panel where the bottles are kept. Also paint in the cave entrance behind the rocket. I told you I was going to do something with it. Start adding white into the black to start creating a dark grey. This will highlight the screen and the glass panel. Make sure to highlight the crack across the panel, not just the flat area. Then add more white in and highlight a smaller area again. And once the base rim is painted, whatever colour you like, I went with black, the painting for the base is complete. Now the oils are dry, it took a couple of days for me, it's time to get the airbrush booth out again. Using a satin varnish, I spray the base to protect the paint job, and once it's dry, it's ready for any flock or tufts you might want to add. Also go ahead and use satin varnish on Liberty Prime. This will seal in the oils and prevent anything we do afterwards reactivating the oil paint. We won't have a massive glossy shine on Liberty Prime, just a more subdued one. But what we are going to do later, we'll use gloss and really stand out. Using Supernova Chrome, we'll paint in the lens on Liberty Prime's head, as well as the power conduits on the top of the backpack, and also use the airbrush to create the start of an OSL. If you're painting this without an airbrush, I'll link in the description how to do OSL without an airbrush. With Platinum Star Metal, spray about half of the lens, focusing more towards the middle of the lens, as that's the focal point for his head laser. I get a bit more overspray than I want, so I wipe it away with my thumb. I also use a brush to give the centre of the power coils a highlight. Using Opulent White, I paint in the brightest point of the lens. Using Topaz Blue, which is a candy paint, so it'll provide a filter over the paints below, I sprayed onto the power conduits and where we did the OSL glow effect. The Topaz Blue gives a great blue glow, and it's one of my favourite paints to use for energy effects now. I also spray onto the lens, but because I was quite close, the air pressure wasn't allowing the paint to stay, so I would recommend using a brush to paint the lens. I also had to wipe away some of the spider webbing that the air pressure had made, since I had to be so close to the model. Going back to the Opulent White, we need to add small highlight to the conduits and lens. We'll still be able to see the previous one we did, so focus on the middle points of that layer to get a nice gradient. Now we can gloss varnish the lens and the power conduits, including the OSL glow. This will give our lighting effects a nice shine and help stand out against the satin varnish due to how light interacts with the gloss varnish. Also, I use gloss varnish on the screen and glass panel on the Nuka-Cola machine on the base. I previously added some pins to the base before I even painted. However, you can also add the pins to Prime's feet and drill holes into the base if you wish. But after dry fitting where Prime's feet will be positioned, I apply some super glue and press Liberty Prime into position.
Communist detected on American soil. Lethal force engaged. Liberty Prime is online. All systems nominal. Weapons hot. Mission: the destruction of any and all Chinese communists.
To tie the base in with the rest of my Fallout models, I added a few tufts on the dirt and used some UV resin to make some water effects around some of the lower parts, like around the bottoms of the rocks and where Liberty Prime has stood, which also helps to strengthen the bond between the feet and the base. I added a blood smear to the concrete where a radar has been dispatched, and leading into the cave on the back of the base is a mysterious green blood. I wonder if it's linked to that crash nearby.